Hi again then guys, and welcome to a review which has been requested for some time, and of course it takes time to get around to reviewing certain vehicles, but they will all be done in due time. Now this car in particular is one which has a long and strong lineage in the Gran Turismo franchise, even as far back as the original games even. And the car is of course the Dodge Viper, available through different dealerships at different times: the Dodge dealership, the SRT dealership, the Chrysler dealership. But one thing has always remained constant, and that is that the Viper has always been a very good performance car in the world of Gran Turismo, and in fact on pretty much any racing game that features it, it's very good. In the Forza franchise as well, they are very strong cars, the ACR in particular. This one though is not an ACR, it's a pure race car, and it's a real race car. It's a Group 3 category vehicle, and it's the GT3-R Viper. Spiritual successor to stuff like the Team Orica Vipers, the GTSRs from Gran Turismo's past, the red versions with the white stripes, the blue and white versions, which this one is a direct inspiration of from way back on Gran Turismo 2, which is still my favourite Viper race car, that one from way back then with this livery. But this car has some very strong specs to its name. The Viper has always been one of those cars that just oozes with huge numbers. Massive capacity, tons of cylinders, a lot of power, a lot of torque, and great speed as well. Great acceleration, great top speed, and this one is no exception. It retains the huge 8.4 litre capacity of the road version and 678 horsepower. That is a lot. That's a whole lot of power to have in a Group 3 car. Now, of course, there are plenty of Group 3 cars which you can get up to that level, but not so many of them have that kind of power already. So that's pretty impressive. Another thing that they often don't have, especially stuff like Ferraris or the Renault RS01 or Lamborghinis, that kind of thing, ones which are more rev-happy engines, they don't tend to have as much torque. They have a lot of power, but torque not so much. A Viper has no worries when it comes to torque. It's similar to the Corvette, but even further. 641 pound-feet of torque is huge for any car, let alone a race car. And when you combine that with a weight of a pretty decent 1,290 kilos, which is a bit more than some, that's about 100 kilos more, for instance, than, say, an Alpha 4C or, again, the Renault RS01, but at the same time, it's not the heaviest in the category. It's a pretty decent weight to be working with. That's a lot less, for instance, than the 1,350 kilos that something like the BMW Z4 GT3 or the Nissan GT-R race cars were on Gran Turismo 6. So the car has strong innate potential, at least on paper. It's 450 grand, as you'd expect it to be, and the horsepower per tonne is pretty high as well, 526. So what's it actually like to drive? Because it's got a lot of weight on its shoulders. I personally don't feel as strongly about this latest, well, the last incarnation of the Viper, the final facelift. I don't like it as much as the previous ones. I know a lot of people do, but it's not quite as sharp, and that is something, funnily enough, which all games have in common. This newer Viper, despite having the biggest engine and the highest power already, when you tune it, is never as good. On Forza, Gran Turismo, some others as well, it's never as strong or as fast as the first, second, third generation Vipers before it. So, what is this one like as a race car, and also, by definition, how does it compare to the other Group 3 machines? Well, on its own, in a vacuum, if you will, it's a great car. It immediately makes a good impression on you, even if you don't do much to it. I'm only running 1 degree of camber, and I don't really even need that. Quite a bit of downforce, but again, you could easily take it lower, and it's on racing hards, as you can see, so far from being the absolute pinnacle of tyres, and yet it handles like a dream. Even with slightly downgraded weight and upgraded power, it's still not difficult to drive at all. In fact, as far as cars with this much power go, in GT class racing specifically, I would even go so far as to say that this is one of the easiest to drive. And that's one of the great things again about the Viper, because the road car is already designed to cope with so much power and torque, it's not as much of a jump for the race car to be able to do that. Whereas something like an Alfa Romeo 4C race car, although it does a very good job of it, it has no way near the kind of power in road form that it does in race form. Whereas with a Viper, you're already looking at 640 horsepower, so to jump up to 678, it's not a massive increase, so the car can very capably cope with that, especially given better tyres, more downforce, better aero design in general in terms of cornering. It's a great canvas to work from, really. And this race car certainly improves on what the road car is already capable of. The Viper is a very forgiving car, as is the Corvette. They're great rivals to each other, and in the racing world, most people are probably wondering, how does it compare to the C7, its closest rival? Well, although I prefer the Corvette, I've always preferred the Corvette over the Viper in road and racing forms, I have to say, this is better than the Corvette. Definitely, because as good as the Corvette C7 is, this is quite simply naturally a more powerful car to begin with, and of course that's not including balance of performance, but also, more importantly than that, it's already a more forgiving car. And although being more forgiving doesn't automatically make a car faster, because often a more difficult car will end up being the faster machine, because it's a more professional inclined driver's car, something like a Cobra or a McLaren F1 or a TVR for instance, they can definitely be quicker. For other people though, especially for newer people to the game, or people who don't have this level of racing experience, maybe they've just driven road cars, never something with that kind of power, then being that beginner friendly can make all the difference between being left behind and being able to, at the very least, keep up with the pack. Not necessarily win every race with no skill, of course not, but to at least have a fighting chance of keeping up with the pack, because everyone has to start somewhere when it comes to racing. So if you can have a car that allows you to have the power and torque to be competitive, but at the same time forgive you for certain mistakes, that's a pretty nice advantage to have. Now don't get me wrong, it's not an infallible car, it's not like you can't spin out. It doesn't have all-wheel drive for instance, of course you can, but it's a lot more forgiving than a car with this kind of power, torque and sheer monstrous engine spec really has any right to be. So this car is definitely worth a look. It's great for beginners and experienced drivers, it's a strong all-rounder, and if you haven't got one yet, definitely check it out, it will serve you well. But that's it for this particular pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.